so grateful for joining us today. We know that you are quite busy people, and believe you me, we do not take your participation very lightly. We are here to get inspired by the works done by our industry experts, to get a little bit of insight on the latest technologies, the advancements, maybe even for them to share their stories about how they got to where they are. So the theme for this year's conference is showcasing geo-best practices in West Africa. I hope you're excited. You have your questions, your expectations written down so that we all get something from here, and it helps us in our schools, in our offices, and even in our projects. So I'm Josephine Into, the Research and Development Officer for Sambus Geospatial Ghana. It's an honor being here with you today. Last year, we had a very interesting session, and I believe that we are going to get even more insights from what we are going to learn here today. At this point, I would like to invite the opening remarks, but before then, we'd like to establish a few ground rules. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available after. In fact, we have a YouTube channel, so feel free to subscribe, and when the recording is uploaded, receive a notification and get to review the webinar that we have had and maybe get to know a little bit more about that. Kindly keep your microphones muted to minimize interruptions, and the chat box is available for us to have interactions. Now, in this particular session, we have a chat box and a Q&A section. I would recommend that all questions are posted in the Q&A section, and any other interactions be done in the chat box so that we can manage and then monitor all the queries that we receive. Also, when sending your questions, please let us know to whom you are addressing them, because we have different speakers today. The questions will be answered in the Q&A section of the chat, but at the same time, at the end of the 3 sessions, we'll have an actual Q&A portion of the presentation to respond to questions, and at which point the mute will be unmuted to share your questions verbally. A feedback form will also be shared for you to give your comments and assessments of this program. We are always looking to improve. We aim towards excellence and serving you better. So I would like to welcome Samuel Zoe, our Business Development Lead for Ghana, to give us the opening address. Welcome, Samuel.
All right, thank you very much, Josephine. I hope you can all hear me. Okay. Good morning once again. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed participants, very welcome to you all to the annual Sambus Geo-User Conference. It is my great pleasure to host this esteemed gathering where we come together to celebrate and showcase the very best of practices in geospatial technology within the vibrant region of West Africa. Under the theme, Showcasing Best Practices in West Africa, this conference promises to be a remarkable journey of discovery, learning, and inspiration. We have gathered here virtually, uniting professionals, students, and experts from diverse fields, all connected by a shared passion for harnessing the power of geospatial technology to shape a better future. The significance of our theme cannot be overstated. West Africa is a region teeming with untapped potential, ripe with opportunities waiting to be unlocked. By highlighting the best practices in geospatial technology specific to this region, we aim to inspire and equip each one of you with valuable insights and practical knowledge that can be applied to your own endeavors. I extend my heartfelt appreciation to our esteemed speakers who have graciously agreed to share their expertise and experiences with us. Their presentations will provide us with invaluable lessons, illuminating the path forward for geospatial innovation in West Africa. To our participants, I want to express my gratitude for your active participation and commitment to advancing geospatial intelligence. Your presence here today signifies your dedication to learning, growing, and making a difference. Together, we'll create a vibrant community of geospatial professionals, united by a shared vision for leveraging technology for the betterment of our societies. During this conference, I urge each and every one of you to actively engage in the chat section and make sure that you take something wonderful away from this conference. Once again, I extend a warm welcome to all of you. Let us come together, showcase the best practice, and pave the way for a brighter, more sustainable future in West Africa. Thank you, and I wish you a rewarding and memorable conference experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel, for formally opening this conference. We'll just dive into our first presentation. I know that a lot of us are from different backgrounds, and I can assure you that we have a little bit of something for everyone. We have speakers going to talk about remote sensing, speakers going to talk about GIS. They are going to share their journeys, how they got to the place they are, and inspire us to also attain great levels in our careers and education. So our first speaker is Valentine. He is coming back to us from last year. He was with us last year. He gave a very touching and informative presentation, which I was honored to be a part of. He is a geospatial analyst and technical advisor at GIZ. So he is actually has a career in geospatial technology and information. He is accomplished in spatial analysis, digitization, 3D modeling, spatial model building, web development, map design, data collection, and processing. So in this session, he'll be showcasing the capabilities of Esri's online tools for geospatial analysis and web mapping. Welcome, Valentine, and it's good to see you here.
Thank you very much, Joseph. It's a pleasure to be back again this year and to share my experiences with you. Today, I would actually want to make a presentation that might inspire everyone who doesn't use GIS at the moment to at least look at the possibilities of using GIS in your work. The focus of my presentation today is going to look at GIS for everyone, and then how everyone can use GIS. Now, the understanding is that a lot of people don't actually know what GIS is and then the capabilities of GIS and their works. So today, I actually look forward to inspiring everyone, let you see the power of GIS and then an ecosystem that can support you to use the tools and the systems for your work and then come up with great solutions and innovation. Now, the focus of this presentation is going to look at what GIS is, an evolution of GIS over the period, what you can use GIS for, and then how everyone can apply and use GIS in their works. So before we get started, the very first time I heard the term GIS, we're actually in a class. And then when they asked what GIS is, somebody actually said Ghana Information Service, which wasn't wrong, it was actually true. But in this particular case, we're looking at GIS as a system or tool that is used to capture spatial information. You actually allow to use that tool to collect information, process the information, come out with relevant results and analysis, and then also visualize your data in such a way that you wouldn't get under normal data processing. Now, to highlight that, GIS actually uses maps to collect information, but it doesn't just collect coordinates. It actually collects information related to that particular coordinate. So it focuses on what is happening, where it is happening, why it is happening, and if there are any connections within or between those attributes, occurrences, or events. Now, while a lot of people might be comfortable working with data in a table like this, there are actually a lot of insights that you miss when you look at data just in the table without any visual representation. Now, everybody was like, well, statistics is good. We are able to calculate the numbers. We're able to do computations. But the truth is sometimes statistics and a normal visualization of data in a table like this doesn't actually provide you with the insights you need. And as Jay Bear said, we are surrounded by data, but we are starved for insights. Now, just to highlight the power of GIS to you and then how it presents data, I wanted to have a quick history of the first instance of GIS. And this happened in London. That was in the year of 1854, when an epidemiologist used GIS to actually discover the root causes of cholera. That's during the cholera outbreak. Now, during that period, there was a belief that cholera was airborne, and then people were scared of going out or even breathing. But the epidemiologist by the name of John Snow, this guy, John Snow, actually found a way to deduce what the root cause of cholera was. So what he did was he found a map of the area where the cholera cases were predominant. Then he mapped out where the deaths were occurring. So on the screen, what you see with the red dots were the houses where the deaths were occurring. Then he also mapped out the existing water sources. That's the wells and the standpipes where they used to access water. And in this particular case, he realized that there were 11 water sources within the area with predominant cases. But when he visualized his data, he realized that at the workhouse, where we had 535 people, there were only 6 deaths, which was odd because there were a lot of deaths during that particular period. And he also realized that in the brewery, where they had 70 workers, only 0 people within that particular area had died. So what he later realized was that within the workhouse, those individuals that stayed within that area had their own water source. And then within those who went to the brewery, they were actually giving water and supplements, and they were giving beer for supplements and water. But please, I'm not trying to encourage anyone to go drinking beer. So he realized that the root cause of cholera was actually from the water. And then on the broad street, where you had that borehole was the case 0, or where the predominant cases was. Now, under normal circumstances, if you present this particular data as a table or try to show it with graphs, it doesn't actually give you insights as to where.
Hello, Valentine. Please, can you hear me? It seems you've gone offline. Okay. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please. We can hear you now. Do you mind sharing your screen or sharing your presentation?
It's off. Sure.
Yes,
Let me do that again.
Okay. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
I don't know what last you heard, but I'll continue from here.
No
so
problem.
We're just looking at common instances of the use of GIS, and then here it's one common use that everyone has probably experienced in transportation. We also have instances of the use of GIS in urban planning and service delivery. And here it's mostly used by planners, NGOs, and then other institutions that are looking for development within space and how they can find suitable location or spaces to provide some of their innovations, and then how they can distribute resources properly for access within communities. And in most recent cases, we've seen the power of GIS and tracking galamsey. And what you actually see here is the Pra River, and then the extent of damage to the water, and then cases of areas where mining is actually taking place. So if you look at the instance from 1854, that was the first instance where we had actually seen an experience of GIS. But the term GIS wasn't coined until 1960. And in 1982, Esri actually released the first Info version for use. And then in 1996, we actually had an Open GIS consortium formed to promote GIS and then data interoperability. Now, what we're going to look at is the ecosystem that allows you to undertake all your geoinformation projects. That's the Esri online system. Now, with the Esri product, you actually have access to tools that allow you to go on field for data collection, to process your data, to analyze your data, and then to present your data for public use or even for individual use. Now, the focus of this presentation is going to be on data collection, data processing and visualization, and then data presentation. I have interacted with a lot of people from various fields this year, and then it's going to be very difficult for us to look at data analysis because based on your background, the type of analysis you want to undertake is quite different. So we'll just focus on this three, and then probably next year or in another period, we can actually look at data processing in details. So let's actually get into it and get started to have some practical experience of what's going to happen. Now, here I'm already in my Esri platform. I don't know if my screen is visible, but I will need a confirmation.
Your screen is visible now, yes.
All right, great.
Yeah.
So with the Esri platform, it has a lot of tools that allows you to do a lot of work. And here we have a lot of options for creating web platforms, for creating tools for your work for processing and analyzing data. But one of the tools I actually want to introduce you to is the Sambus Geospatial, which is a field data collection tool. This tool actually allows you to create your own data collection form for geospatial data, carrying this form to the field, collecting your data on the field, and also allowing you to visualize and process your data within the same environment. We have different tools, and in most cases, we have people going to the field with GPS's device. But usually when they come back, you have to process that, then put that into your software. But within this domain, you can actually create your own survey from scratch, or we also have existing templates that you can work with. And once you have that in place, you're actually able to then go to the field with this, collect information, and it's synchronized. And then institutions and organizations can set this up to even monitor activities on the field whilst they are ongoing. Now, one of the special elements in using the Sambus Geospatial is that you're able to integrate a lot of spatial components into this. I know a lot of you have used Google Forms, a lot of you have used the Microsoft Forms. It's quite similar, but different. So here you are allowed to add data. You can add a map, and if you click on map, it actually places a map for you, and then you're able to set parameters for a question around it. So here for a question or the label, I can just add, kindly add your location to it as the question, so that anyone who is using the form actually understands that you're supposed to provide your location into this. So kindly add your location. And just like any form that you work with the Google and the rest, you're able to add extra information. So here with the map, you're able to specify whether you want to just pick points, you want to pick lines, or whether you want to actually demarcate an entire area. And recently, I'm aware that Cocoa Board is using an approach like this to collect information from farmers on the field. Some institutions and NGOs in the North too have also started integrating spatial science into collecting information for better understanding and visualization of occurrences in the field, and then how they can directly access those places using visualization and then mapping. So here you can set your map extent and everything you need, and then you can set that for people to add extra. So now you can also add your single base questions. You can add Likert scales, and a Likert scale is just something that allows you to choose within a range. So if I want to ask your level or scale in GIS, I can add this there, and then I can actually specify which level this is. Now, all this information you're collecting can actually be exported into an Excel sheet. But the interesting thing is, with the data you've also collected, you're able to visualize that within a map for individuals who are looking at it to actually see the distribution or understanding of what you've collected from the field. In most cases, when you look at simple Excel fields, it's very difficult for you to understand where exactly what is happening. Now, I want to show you this. This is an Excel sheet of health facilities in Ghana. Now, within this particular list, there are 2,800 or over 2,800 health facilities within the country. Now, the question is, as an institution or someone who is ready to provide solutions or interventions to a particular district or health facility, how exactly do I identify the location of these health facilities? With this particular data, it's very helpful for me to see, okay, we have this number of health facilities, we have the names, they're within this particular town. But let's assume that I have never been to Nkwanta North or Nkwanta South, and I actually want to go there. Well, I can go to the district assemblies and then have a discussion with them. But if they gave me the data and I had to come back and analyze it, how exactly do I understand the relationship between the location of the health facility and then the people? And then in most instances, you always want to identify how things happen in space and then why they happen as such. Now, what we're going to look at is presenting the same data in a format that allows other people to also interact and then work with it. So we are going to create a basic map. In this particular case, we don't have any data to collect with this form. So we're just going to look at some existing data. So now I'm going to open the contents of my browser. I already took the liberty of uploading the data into the browser. So we're going to look at the contents of it and then how we can actually use that same information to create a web map that we can share with other people to interact with the data that we have. So if you open this on the map, you're already going to see the location and the distribution of those health facilities in space. And then how they are distributed will also give you more insight as to how you go about providing solutions. This is the insight that you lack when you work with just data in tables and not having them spatially distributed or spatially presented. Now, the tool that we are going to look at is the ArcGIS Online Map Viewer tool that allows you to actually visualize your data, process your data, and then also perform some analysis on the data. And all this is online and in one space. Notice when we started, I haven't actually moved to another software. I'm still working with the same area. So here is the same data that was presented in the Excel sheet, but it's actually presented in a map. And then it's visualized in different colors for me to understand what type of health facilities these are. I've already programmed this to show me with this particular colors. But then again, you can always symbolize your data or your information with different colors for better understanding. And when you zoom in or click on any of those of that information, you will actually get the details of it as we're seeing in the Excel file. So I can still see which region this is, which district, the town, and then the other information as was presented in the Excel sheet. But now what we want to do is we actually want to use this data to create a web map, which we can share with people. It's not stable. Hello? Hello?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
All right, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this data here to create a web map. Okay, so with the data that you have collected, if you're using the form, we have just done this straightforward, but here it was brought in from the Excel sheet and then placed here. Now within the same domain, I can click on create map, and then it's going to give me different options to create maps. Now, one beautiful thing is the Esri Online package has already got existing templates that you can use for your map designs or for your map works. Now here it's going to ask you basic questions like, what do you actually want to prepare the app for? Is it to showcase the map and essential tools? Is it to allow viewers to interact with your data? Is it to provide public information, or is it to display a variety of features? And these already come with templates that you can already pick and then use. So once you have data and you understand what you want to do with that data, then it makes it very easy for you to actually proceed with creating the app that you want to. But what I actually want to do is I want to create a unique system which allows us to actually visualize and then interact with the data. And then under normal circumstance, this takes you between 5 to 10 minutes in creating an app and then sharing it with individuals. So here I'm going to click on create app, and I'm going to use the web app builder to create the app. And they are going to ask me to specify some details, and this is just going to be the Geo-User Conference. So Geo-User Conference. They ask for some tags. I'll add a tag that helps or makes it easy for people to identify the maps if they want to know what the map is all about. A summary and then a folder to save it in. So I'm just going to proceed and click OK. Now it's going to send me to a platform and then provide me with templates that are going to allow me to create a simple map for myself using the data that I already uploaded in the system. And this also works just like if you collected the data using the mobile app field, you could just proceed to use that same data to present or create the platform that you want. Now, in the case of the COVID-19 dashboard that was displayed, this was the theme at the left that was used in the preparation of that particular map. And then you are allowed to fill in the details. But what I want to do is create a sample map with sample widgets, and I can set the colors. So this is the template I want to use. Then under the map section, I'm going to choose my map or my data, which is the Ghana Health Facility maps that we uploaded from the Excel sheet. Now, it's going to load that data, and then they're going to allow me to add functionalities to this particular map. So with the functionalities, you're able to add on stuff that you want your app to be able to do. So in this particular case, I want my app to be able to show different satellite images so that people can understand where the data actually lies. And here I'm going to choose the base map gallery and click on OK. And it's just going to ask me to perform or add some little settings to it. And these are the extra images that are going to be added to the map. Now, if you take the map that is currently displayed, you can't actually tell which building or where it is located in space. And for those who don't know how to read maps, they prefer to see their data visually. So with the base maps, what it allows you to do is it allows you to change the background of your map into an image, which gives you a proper visual understanding of where these are. So if I zoom in more closely, I'm not just seeing bare space, but I'm actually able to identify each building as they are arranged in space for simple identification of where this health facility is actually located. And I think this is more comprehensive or comprehensible for people who don't actually know how to read maps. Once you see something like this, you're able to tell the road networks, and then you're able to tell where the buildings are, and then using your data to easily identify the location of where these things are. So I'm going to proceed and then add extra. I want my map or my app to be able to give me directions. So I'm going to add directions, and I'm going to specify that the directions should be based on my data so that someone can actually click on my data and say, you know what, I want you to give me directions to this particular data. And as you do this, all this information is not just going to be kept on your desktop or going to be on the printed map, but it's going to be a web version software that allows you to actually interact with the data that has been created. So I also want to add a legend so that people who are using the data can understand what the data is about. And I'm going to make sure that it's all about the data that I am presenting here. So when I click on this, on the legend icon that has been added, I'm able to see the health facilities and the data that has been loaded on the map. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to add widgets to this tool. Then I'm going to share it with you for you to interact with it to see how it actually works. And because I'm actually making a presentation and I have to explain the stuff, it's actually taking me quite a while. But if I didn't have to speak, then this would have been finished in 5 minutes at least. And that is all because the GIS platform allows you to create this whilst giving you templates to use to present your data and create platforms that make it easy for people to interact with this particular data. Now, whilst I have finished providing all the widgets, I am able to preview what I have created on different devices to make sure that it works the way I want it to be. So I can actually check how it is going to look like if I have it on a tablet, or even if I have it on a Samsung Galaxy or an iPhone or an iPad. And once you're satisfied with everything, you're able to then share this map with individuals online. You can also integrate this with your websites, your web platforms. You can share it with your partners. You can share it with institutions. You can also share it with individuals who you are working with for them to actually interact with the data that has been created. So now that I am done with creating this simple web map, I'm going to save it. And you always have to save your work just in case light goes off so that you still have it. I'm going to save it and I'm going to launch the app. So once you launch the app, it means that you are allowed to then share this app with other people. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the link for the app that we have created, and I'm going to drop it in the chat. And then each and every one of you can actually go through it and then see what we have created. It's actually easy to do. It's not complicated. Under 5 minutes, you're able to create your map, you're able to visualize your map, and you're actually able to create a tool that allows you to go to the field and then collect data. So this is the experience I want to share with you. There are actually instances for a lot of institutions to use GIS in their works. And then this data or approach to analyzing data gives you insights that you wouldn't normally see if you were just working with it on an Excel or in a cell format. Whilst it's good to also have it in a cell format, this creates a database and an ecosystem where you can actually share the work you're doing with other people for insights, for feedback, and then for proper understanding of the data that you have collected. I'll still be present in the meetings, so if anyone has a question to ask, kindly feel free to drop it in the chat or during the questions session. You can actually put the question there and I will respond to it. But then again, thank you for your attention and for your participation in this Geo-User Conference. And it's glad to be here again. Have a nice day. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Valentine. In fact, I've learned a lot, and I'm sure those of us who are not as conversant with the geospace as some of the professionals can learn something from this and also get in touch with you for more. We really appreciate your time, and thank you so much. So if anyone has any more questions, kindly post them in the Q&A section. They will be addressed, and at the end of all 3 sessions, these questions will be addressed again, and anyone else with further questions and queries can post them. Okay, so we are ready for the next part of this conference. We have with us another speaker who this time is a lady. She is the Chief Scientific Officer at the National Center for Remote Sensing at GEOS Nigeria. Yeah, at GEOS Nigeria. She is in the person of Esther Shupel Ibrahim. I did a little bit of research into her because I'm a big fan of female geospatial professionals because I love being inspired by them. It seems a very technical field, so always seeing a friendly, familiar, and female face is very encouraging, especially to someone like me. She is well versed in not only geospatial technology, but also remote sensing and geoinformatics. She specializes in the applications in agriculture, renewable energies, ecology, and sustainable resource management. So get ready to be inspired by her journey and her experiences in harnessing the power of ArcGIS to address critical issues in Nigeria. Welcome, Esther. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you, Josephine. Hi, everyone. I am honored to be able to give this talk today and to share my experience, my journey with remote sensing and GIS data, and my affair with ArcGIS, of course, as one of the tools that I use almost every day in my work. So I will go right into my talk. She's introduced me and told what I do. I just want to run through some of things that we've done. My major affiliation, like she said, is the National Center for Remote Sensing, but I also have other affiliations as well. So the outline of my talk, I just want to start briefly with discussing how I started with remote sensing with simple tasks as a technician when I was employed with the National Center for Remote Sensing, then gradually transforming from simple tasks as a technician into a remote sensing researcher. So it's like going for one of these Nigerian weddings where you go as a normal person and then you get changed completely into something else. It was an interesting journey, and I would like to share some of the examples of the work that I've done in this field, and then and what will be the takeaway. I know there are a lot of people from different backgrounds at different levels of your career. Some are students, so I'll start from the very basic, simple things that I've done into the more complex things. So at the end of the day, I want you to take away home that there are different capabilities for geospatial tools, what you can do with remote sensing and GIS, and of course, through my talk, you'll see why I've said that. Basically, I started with very, very basic tools where we digitize maps, we scan maps, old maps for Nigeria, scan them, georeference them. So it's just a process of like onion peeling. You have a layer of information there, you come back from analog, very simple tasks, but very powerful as well as a gen. So you extract layers of information from this, you peel them one after the other. So what I could do back then was to view them and also maybe prepare simple maps. I didn't really know that there was more one could do with this data. So this change actually, we also did the same thing with paper maps or paper records where you have chaos in your data that you cannot easily retrieve. But once you have this chaos, you can have a system where you use remote sensing and you use GIS to compile and build the geodatabase. Just like the first speaker has demonstrated, you can prepare them in Excel, but the beauty of having a geodatabase is that they have longitude and latitude. Just like he showed you, you can see their locations on Earth. You can pinpoint them to your location. So this was very powerful, and we did quite a bit of work in that aspect, my office, and individually or with collaborations with other organizations. So it could be anything, just like he demonstrated. It could be health facilities, mineral resources, police stations, whatever it is that you have data for can be translated into a geodatabase. Like I said, we've done quite a bit of that. We have also for Nigeria done some health facility mapping, converting it into a digital and a remote sensing GIS environment. We've done that for commercial buildings, and I've done that with some experts for filling stations in Kaduna, and then most recently in 2020, worked with some experts to build a geodatabase for mineral resources in Nigeria. Funny enough, it's also a web map, just like what he demonstrated. So build a geodatabase that you can access online via web facility. So also in the coming years, when later on, okay, we can do geodatabase and all that. So I realized that there's far more you can do. So that happened when I moved from ArcView to ArcMap or ArcGIS. So now I was exposed during my master's degree to a lot of tools, very simple tools, but individually they don't have power. But when you start to combine these tools to solve problems, then it becomes very, very important then how you combine them. So from simple into research tools. So, so the critical thing is when you have a research problem, now thinking how can I use this GIS, ArcGIS, whatever environment you're using, to solve this environmental problem that I see. So having been exposed to that, I did a lot of small projects here and there in the Netherlands where I was doing my master's. So I practically just experienced how you can move from just simple tools in ArcGIS, but also doing projects that have environmental relevance. I will not go into some of the projects, but my main research, moving from technician to research, was actually my MS project, where we were trying to see how much we can get in terms of renewable energy from built-up areas. So where you have leaves littered all over the place, you have grasses in the urban centers, you have waste from household waste and all of that. So we had the source of this this biomass, and what we did was try to explain or try to see how we can convert that into an estimation for potentials. So this was published. If you're interested in reading this article, you can, anything I show with a QR code, you can always scan and reach what this work is all about. So I'll be presenting quite a few that are published and you can actually access them. So after being exposed to that, when I came to Nigeria, so there are a lot of things, I just started to see in the environment, different problems. Oh, I now know how to use GIS, and then I can solve this problem, I can solve that problem. So one of the fascinating aspects for me was change detection. And I've done quite a bit with my colleagues in that regard. So the principle of change detection is simple. Like you have attributes. Attributes can be water, built up, or anything, or just the facilities that you have. And then over time, they can change. So at what location are they changing? That is the beauty of GIS, the location, the spatial context of it. So you're doing like a time slice analysis. You're seeing what is changing from what over time and answering environmental problems as well. One of the projects that we did was for Taraba State in Nigeria. So we know that Taraba State was created in 1991. And there's a lot of migration, there's increase in population. So the research question was like, can we see what is changing as a result of this increase? This is Jalingo, by the way, this dot is Jalingo. You can clearly see from 1986 to 2012, that is about 26 years, Jalingo kept on expanding, and you see that there's increase in farmlands, and also see that there's a decrease in forest areas. So clearly, we just had a simple research question. Okay, Jalingo, Taraba was created. Jalingo became the headquarters. What is happening around Jalingo and locations? What is happening around Jalingo and the settlements around it? So this gives you a clear pattern of what is changing from what to what. And then if you zoom into the statistics, you can clearly see, measure in terms of area, how much of what is reducing, how much of what is increasing. You see that the farmlands are increasing clearly, and also the vegetation decreasing in terms of statistics. Now, another change detection we did with a colleague is for Benue Body, Nigeria, where the research question here is wetland. So what is happening to the wetland in Benue State? This is in Makurdi. Now, this is an important location where there's a lot of cultivation, but also rice cultivation is. So wetland is an ecological importance. So we wanted to see what is happening in the wetland location. You can see from 1986 to 2012, there's decrease in wetland and increase in farmland. So now, looking at the statistics also, you can clearly see patterns. But now, growing into research, you start to ask questions. Why do we see this changing? Unlike in Taraba, where we're interested in just seeing what is changing, and you can clearly attribute it to the creation of the state. Now you have wetland that is far more complex to explain. Not increase in population can explain why you see the decrease. Increase in farming activities can explain why you see this decrease. But can climate change also play a role? So now research is becoming more complicated as it is. So you are saying, is there an increase in rainfall? Is there a decrease in temperature? What is happening? You start to have other questions that need to be addressed. Now, and change detection, there are different levels. What I've shown you is just the first level of change detection, where you have things changing from this to that, forest to farmland, farmland to built-up area, or built-up area from forest, or now farmland being fallow after some years and going back to forest. But then there's another level. There's a second and third level of change detection. Why do these changes happen? From what is it changing to what? So now you can see another level of change detection. So like I said, gradually understanding is and we have more research questions and trying to understand the results that we see in a very broader context. So now we went to Borno State. The research area in Borno State is called Jeribal, like you see, just like the name implies. Very interesting area. So you were trying to see what is happening to farmland in this area. But note that there's also a lot of cloud cover in this location. Now, I forgot to mention, most of this change detection that we were doing then, it was just using one-time slides. So maybe you have image in October, another one in November. So you buy a slide, then you have to buy one set of Landsat for $50 or so. So you buy one Landsat for this year, one for this year, and then you compare these changes. But are the changes also seasonal? Or could it be as a result of the changes in the data that we're using? So we're growing and asking more questions. Or these changes that you see, can it simply be associated to the insecurity in Borno State? Could it be that the farmlands are reducing as a result of Boko Haram? So you start to ask a lot of questions around the environment that can help you understand these results that you see. So like I said, the second level now you're trying to see what is changing what. Now you have a second level of change detection that shows areas that have not changed and areas that have changed. So you see that majority of the build-up areas have not changed, majority of farmlands have not changed, but you can see a lot of changes from what is water, from what is agriculture, and what is the vegetation for the classes. Now that comes with what is called a cross table. So this cross table tells you what happened from one year to the other. Are you losing one class to the other, or are you gaining from one class to the other? So this simply shows from farmland to this, from farmland to that. So you can now calculate or estimate what is gaining at the expense of what. Now you can form this kind of hypothesis and explain why they are, or just do more research. I'll talk about that later in another paper. Now this is time series for another part in Borno State, because we were speculating at that then by 2010, okay, maybe Boko Haram is making these farmers to abandon their farms. Now, more recently, there are even more attacks in that area. And this is Dalori. Dalori is close to the town. So we're trying to see what story can you see from satellite. Politicians and others are reporting, and NGOs are reporting that farmers are abandoning their farms because of security. Is it true? Can we see this pattern from the satellite image? So we start to analyze from 2014 to 2021. You can clearly see in yellow, you will see what is farmlands. And what is fallow is this pink. And what you see as green is the vegetation. So you can see from the start year in 2014, there were quite more farms there. But as you graduate to 2021, the farms kept decreasing and changing either to vegetation or to just fallow lands. Why do we see these changes? If I zoom into only farmland classes, you clearly see the same thing. What is remaining is very small as at 2021. Look at the trend analysis. This yellow is the farmlands. You see that especially from 2017 upward, it's further decrease in what is farmland. Well, there's an increase here in what is brown here as fallow or built up area, and you also see a lot of increase in vegetation. So these results clearly show you that yes, indeed, these reports about farmlands being abundant in this area can be true, because this is clearly shown on the satellite image. Now, having shown you that, I'm moving to another change detection that we did for the Jos Plateau with my colleagues. This interest is actually for farmlands, for vegetation. This is Jos Plateau area. We are seeing the Mejuju plains where you have a lot of green as vegetation. But we're trying to understand this green in vegetation, will it remain, will it change in the coming years? So we took it a level further now, not just seeing what has happened over the past, but use Markovian principle of change detection so to predict what will happen in the next coming years. So by 2050, you can see if nothing changes, probably there will be more vegetation in that area. So the probability of the area becoming highly vegetated increases by the year, but then we did not put other factors into play. We're just trying to see what happens as at then. So in another change detection, we were trying to see what's happening in Yobe State in Nigeria, where there's a lot of reports of desertification. So our class of interest here is sand dunes. So we analyze for Yusufari and Yusufari LGAs of the Yobe State from 1990 to 2015. What is happening there? Do we actually see increased sand dunes over the years? Yes, we do. If you zoom into sand dunes, you will see that clearly from especially from 2000, you see an increase in sand dunes, a decrease in vegetation, a decrease in wetland, and farmlands kept on increasing as well as built-up areas. Why do we see these changes? Why? So we start to think, okay, yeah, Yobe State was created around 1991 too, but this is not a capital of Yobe State. Why are the farmlands increasing there? Is the population increasing? But if you're talking about sand dunes and desertification, also climate change is very important. So we move to the next level of the research question and say, okay, clearly, okay, we zoomed in first and saw that in so many of our time slides, you can clearly see from 1990 to 2015, a consistent increase in sand dunes, except for this time slides where it's more or less stable. But in most of the time slides, a gradual increase in what is sand dunes. We also analyze what is changing from sand dunes. From what to sand dunes, you can clearly see that a lot of farmlands have changed to sand dunes. Like I said, this when you talk about desertification, it is not a clear cut. There is an issue of climate change where you can look at satellite image and conclude. So can we do some statistical analysis to confirm whether the changes we see in the Yobe State, Nigeria, the desertification, is it a factor of human activity or climate change? You want to find out more, you can scan and also participate. So you will see that in the area, temperature is reducing and rainfall is increasing. So in terms of climate variables, you expect to see a lot of green there. If precipitation is increasing, temperature is decreasing, we should have more green, not less green. We should have less sand dunes, not more sand dunes. But unfortunately, we see the reverse. So we test simple regression, multilinear regression, and see what's happening. You can see where we check the indicators for desertification, vegetation loss, increase in sand dunes, increase in wetlands, as against the climate factors. Where you expect to see a positive correlation, you see a negative. Where you expect to see a negative, you see a positive. Clearly, there's no correlation. We went further to check what happens with the NDVI. So we had MODIS data from 1990 to 2015 to see what's happening in the NDVI. What this says is that where you have a narrow gap is where you have a correlation between what is happening in temperature and rainfall and NDVI. NDVI is the greenness. How green is the area, not how bare. But you can clearly see as you move towards recent past, there's a deviation. You can see a wide gap between what is happening in the area and what climate change is. There's an increase in rainfall, but it doesn't reflect here. So this was some of our finding. If you want to find out, like I said, more, you can research. Now we move from change detection into spatial modeling. Spatial modeling, I love spatial modeling because it allows you to play with GIS data, and then you have real world situations. You can play with data to create a scenario that you can play around and see what changes if certain behavior in the society can change. If people reduce the way they cut trees or whatever, what will happen in the coming years, or how can we address certain societal problems? So spatial modeling allows you to do that. So there are a lot of models that are built, GIS models that are built for that. But what is interesting about GIS environment like ArcGIS, it allows you to also build your own model. So you can either use manual mathematical equations in any of the GIS to ArcGIS or you can use your user-generated models to build spatial models that also as accurate as those models that were built specifically for certain reasons. Now we've done quite a bit in terms, you can use spatial modeling for vulnerability and susceptibilities. We have done quite a bit of work in terms of this aspect, and I'll talk about flood and erosion. Now, from 2012 in Nigeria up to 2018, 2020, what you highly see is that report after report of flooding. Year after year, you see a lot of flooding being reported, and in Nigeria, people in everything that they own, their houses and their farms to flood. So in my office, as at 2012, we wanted to see what happens. Why do we see these areas inundated? So we look at the elevation model, digital elevation model, to see areas that are likely flooded in an event of excessive rainfall or release of a dam or water, for example. So this is a SAT-X image of Nigeria. You see what happens when we project that these areas are likely to be flooded if rainfall becomes intense. So we're trying to also estimate what can be affected, how much of farmlands can be affected when you see an increase in rainfall. So we're able to mark that out. But most recently in 2022, this company contacted me. Oh, we want to see why do we see floods in certain areas in Nigeria and we don't see some in some areas. So can we have a map that shows areas that are highly vulnerable to flood in Nigeria? So we just estimated a simple flood risk map where you will show extreme areas for vulnerability. So areas that are highly vulnerable, those that are probable, and those that are very we have minimum risks of vulnerability. So now we have this flood risk map. This is an area in Lokoja. This is what we projected as being flooded. When we compare, in this is an image, Sentinel-2 image of that same area as of October 11th. You clearly see that the rivers are not flooded. But if you see the same satellite image of 30th, just like a few days, 19 days later, you can clearly see that this whole area is submerged. So if you compare it to what we have projected to be submerged, you can see a similarity, or almost very closely depicting areas that have been submerged. Now, looking at another location, the Lokoja Conference, you can see what we have projected and see what was captured as a 30th of October that year. You clearly see that the submergence of water, areas underwater, is the same thing that we have projected that will be flooded. What is interesting is, yeah, we know we have predicted this has been flooded, but an event of flood, a lot of food is lost. Farmers are complaining everything is washed. But what allows the country to plan better how much we lose and how much are we expecting to import, or are we going to have less food and all that, is estimating how much crops that were lost. So what they wanted to see is that not just farmlands that are at risk, but what is possible that was captured by water. So we did a mapping that revealed areas where we feel they are likely going to be rice based on the NDVI characteristics, or they are likely going to be yam or maize and sugar. So we estimated that. In terms of soil erosion, like I said, I was going to show some of the modeling and soil erosion. We've done a soil erosion with some of my colleagues about just east in Plateau State. This is a catchment called Kurumi. Kurumi is a very important hub for agriculture and in terms of crop production and in terms of animal production. But then the area is highly susceptible to erosion. This area is very important. If we allow erosion to keep capturing most of it, it's going to be catastrophic. Like you see, roads have been divided, farmlands almost washed away completely. So why do we see? And then we're trying to estimate how much soil loss is there every year, and then how can we tackle this aspect of soil loss? Like I said, you can use mathematical expression in ArcGIS or any GIS environment to model once you have, or model a real life event. So we use reversed universal soil loss equation, which is called ROSLI, to estimate how much soil loss there is. This equation goes through the processes of soil loss, which have different equations from the soil erodibility, rainfall resistivity factor, the slope length, cover management, with or without management, how much loss of soil would you have? So using raster calculator, of course, we generated a map for annual soil loss. So the first map that we generated was just showing the soil loss in terms of tons per hectare. So we estimated that every year there can be up to 440,000 tons of soil loss in that area from soil erosion, just using the rainfall, the slope, and other factors. But if you look at management, where you have NDVI cover or you have land use management in a location, the soil loss drastically reduced from 400,000 to only 83,000 tons per hectare. So it means that if more management are into place, we can reduce significantly the amount of soil loss in this area. If you want to read more about this article, you can scan the QR code. In terms of suitability also, we've carried out a bit of projects in that aspect. And then one of the few I'll talk about is modeling crop residue and renewable energy potential this is for a location in Bauchi of Ogoro. If you're familiar with ArcGIS, you know the model. So we build three aspects of the model. The first component is the residue estimation from groundnuts and beans. This is a hub of production for those two crops. See how much residues can be collected there, then estimate the amount of residue that can be converted into energy, then now do a suitability map to see where you can build biogas plants. This was in collaboration with some colleagues in University of Bauchi, people in their electrical engineering department. So if you want to know more about this article, you can go through. Next, I'll talk about irrigation dams, modeling suitable areas for irrigation dams in just East local governments of Nigeria. This area, like I said, is very important for agriculture. There is a lot of irrigation. You see a lot of crops produced during the dry season, but what is critical is that there's water scarcity. So they produce a lot, but before they are harvesting all of their crops, by April, there's no more water to water the crops. So there's scarcity. Some people have reported waking up as early as 2 a.m. to go and fetch water, so that there's competition on water. Some are disconnecting their neighbors just to get water. So we felt, okay, what can we do in that regard to model area where the government can build more irrigation dams? Usually these projects can be guided by politics. Then they build a dam and there's no water. But you can use GIS and remote sensing data to project where they can find water sustainably, and it can meet the target that is required. So we did that using factor maps from climate to environmental factors, standardize them in ArcGIS, and run a suitability map using weighted overlay to see areas that are possible to be dammed and you can find a lot of water. So we identified 10 locations in this local government. So we're trying also to compare the 10 locations that we have selected, what they look like in terms of land cover, what are they used for currently, what is the elevation, what is the slope in terms of engineering and all of that. So having done that, we also try to estimate the amount of water in the dam. Like you're proposing, but you have to also know the availability of water in this party. So we maxed out the proposed dams, used cut and fill in operations in ArcGIS to be able to fill this gap with water, and we're able to estimate for all of the dams the depth, the possible depth right now, or it can be excavated, and the amount of water that can be done. Want to know more about this research, you can scan the QR code. Now, in terms of groundwater potential with some of my colleagues, one of them is Edmond, who works with you. We were trying to see what is the potential for groundwater in Nigeria. We know that there's increase in groundwater, excessive borehole and well drilling in Nigeria. Everywhere there's drilling of borehole. But first of all, where do we have more of this potential for groundwater, and where do we have less? So we modeled that using environmental and climate factors. We saw that you see most of the locations in the southwest and southeast or south-south are where you find a lot of water, and in the confluence and some parts of Yobe and Gombe State. So having known that, we wanted to compare, okay, where are the water availability in terms of ground and surface water, and where are the water demand? Water demand in terms of settlement, in terms of land cover, especially agriculture. So you see that most of the locations where you have density settlements are high, also see you have water. So that's why there's continuous dealing, because they know there's potential for water and they continuously deal. But we have to draw caution. There are currently 260 million of Nigerians. By the year 2050, Nigeria will be the third most populous country in the world, with over 400 million people. If we continue to drill this water, will there still be water for all of us by then? So, which was why we tested this recently with some colleagues about projecting just the Jos Plateau location in Nigeria, using projected data from World Climate, the CMake version 6 maps of climate change projections. So this is showing areas where you are expecting to have high temperature, low temperature, or rainfall in the nearest future. Clearly in this location, there is an increase in rainfall, if you look at the map closely, and also there's projected increase in temperature. How does that translate in terms of projecting future groundwater potential? Now, looking at this changes in climate, this is a positive. You will see clearly that groundwater over the years up until 2100, it will show you clearly that there's an increase in water, but groundwater potential. But would it remain if we continue to harvest so much water in Nigeria? Would that translate into zero instead of more? So I've talked about basic things. We are moving gradually into now what I'm doing currently, which is far more complex. So you're talking about machine learning, just like in every aspect of society, everybody's into machine learning, artificial intelligence. Remote sensing Nigeria is no exception, especially remote sensing. So you have a lot of tools that you can use, but also the capability to store data in cloud. So, and then also the open data policies, especially the Landsat and Sentinel, where you have free data, you have millions of data. Now, using ordinary tools that we use of classification and all that, it cannot interpret fast or get meaningful information from these millions of data. So what you have is AI and then machine learning, where they can be able to compute more fastly this kind of data and information. So I'll show you one of the projects that we used using these very high tools. So we know that smallholder regions in the world produce over 50% of the production. They are very viable, but these estimates are from paper, from survey, FAO surveys, and all of that. There are no maps. Nigeria produces cassava, the largest producer of cassava in the world. Granite, maize about second in West Africa, in Africa. Potato about fourth in Africa. But there are no maps to show where these are. Are just this mere estimates from survey accurate? Can we use remote sensing to accurately estimate how much food is produced from smallholder regions? But then it's not possible. People have shied away from doing so. Why? Because mapping smallholder farmers are very complex. Like the name implies, the fields are very small. There are multiple crops. On one field, you find maize, you find cassava, you find potato, you find legumes. So these mixtures are a nightmare in terms of remote sensing. You also find trees there. Collecting field data is the most complex in the world because these regions are very difficult to access. So if you're planning field data, spend a lot of money to collect just a few data. So, but now we dare to say we want to try to map it. Why? Because there's availability, like I said, for free data. We have multiple data that can mine these complexities. We also have storage capabilities for millions of data. We have advanced machine learning tools, like I said. So in 2020, we wanted to do that for the Jos Plateau region of Nigeria. In 2019, we collected data. In 2020, we also collected data collection. From that data, we were trying to see what are the critical windows we want to map, crop types for that region. So we were interested in maize, potato, and legumes, but we're also not interested in mapping mono or where there's mixtures. So first of all, of importance to note is what is the start of season for each of the crop, what is the peak of season for each of the crop, and what is the end of season for each of the crop. So if you go into that, you build a phenology. From that phenology, you build a strategy that gives you information where to build a spectral temporal matrix. If you have spectral temporal matrix, it means a way that you can combine these millions of satellite data into meaningful windows that the machine learning can see and identify patterns for different things you want to map. So at the end, we had 3 critical windows identified. We used 9 spectral sentinel bands. We had 3 indices. We had 3 tessel caps, 11 STMs. And in total, we produced 770 bands. All of those other maps I showed you, we produced with only 3 bands, 1 image, but these capabilities in remote sensing have far expanded, where you can run analysis of almost 1,000 bands. So at the end, we produced the map, and then this is, as at the time we published these maps, the first ever in the world in terms of intercropping. People had not mapped intercrop, map maize or this or that, but never had attempted to map intercropping. And intercropping is very important in Africa. It means crops are underrepresented because we are mapping them as just one class. So this was very important finding in that regard. So these are the zooms for the maps. If you want to read more about them, you can check the article. Of importance is that the users and producer accuracy for this region for intercropping was significantly high. So indeed, there's a possibility that Sentinel-2 can map this accurately. We also look at field sizes. How do field sizes translate to crop type gradients? We looked at that monocroppings tend to be smaller than intercropping. Intercropping tend to be smaller than monocropping in that regard. You want to know more, you go into that. So currently we're working using AI, machine learning, and a lot of cloud computing to do a lot of other projects, which we plan to publish them soon. So some of these are in terms of disease prediction for plants, agriculture, bioenergy. Is it in West? Is it a smallholder or in developed countries? We also want to test yield predictions and all of that. If you want to know more, you can actually follow me on my research gate handle or academia, or you want future collaborations, you have comments and all of that, you can contact me. So thank you for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Esther, for that in-depth look at some of your projects, especially focusing on the remote sensing section of it. It's been quite enlightening. I'm sure that our participants are also happy to hear from you. Thank you so much. For those of you who are interested, she has her research available in QR code on the screen, so feel free to scan and then check her out. Very, very grateful, Esther. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we have gotten to the midway point of our event, and we would like to open the floor for a poll. We'd like to get to know you better, and kindly give us a minute to show you where to respond. So yeah, on your screens, you should have the poll question. So we have 3 right now. Kindly take just a few seconds of your time to respond. The first one is, have you used any spatial analysis tool before? And by spatial analysis, we mean either GIS or remote sensing, and then whether hardware or software. For our second question, we'd like to know which of these techniques in the options given you have implemented in your work. Is it change detection? Is it spatial modeling? machine learning or artificial intelligence, or is it none of these? Then for the third question, we would like to know which aspect of GIS you'd be interested in knowing more about. Is it data collection, data visualization, data analysis, automated model building, 3D data visualization, web map development, or any others that have not been mentioned here? So take like a few seconds to get your responses, and let's share our thoughts, where we all stand. Some of us may now be learning. We joined because we wanted to know what is GIS in the first place and why should I be interested. Or some of us would like to know other and more advanced technologies in the field of geospatial analysis or remote sensing analysis. So let's give a little more time for everyone to respond. Just 30 more seconds. I personally would like to know more about data visualization. I enjoy seeing pictures a lot. So being able to present your data in a way that everybody understands without having to worry about reading a lot. That is my personal interest. I know some of us are very, very intelligent when it comes to the more technical aspects of it, like the model building. I'm sure some of us are already using artificial intelligence in our workflows. That is quite interesting. We should link up so that you can teach me. That's 3 more seconds. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts in this poll. Let's look at the responses. Oh, that's nice. So over 80% of us have used spatial analysis tool before. For the other about 13%, since we are not as well versed. If you'd like to know more, feel free to get in touch with Sambus Geospatial. Feel free to get in touch with our speakers. If they agree to it, they could give us their details in the chat section. Let's see, for the techniques, change detection has the most people implementing it in their work. Okay, next we have spatial modeling, but it seems quite a number of us have not used any of them in our work before, which gives the opportunity to learn more and to expand our horizon. Again, this is a good opportunity to network. If you would like to, you can give us a brief introduction about yourself in the chat so that anybody who is interested in your field can also get in touch with you. Which aspect of GIS, the third question, would you like to know more about? Okay. Most of us are interested in data analysis. That's cool. I guess I'm alone in the data visualization, along with 7% of us. Automated model building in the second. I see. Thank you so much for your insights and your thoughts. It would be great to carry on this conversation after here. So let's keep this ball rolling even after the conference so that we can keep building our career prospects and develop ourselves professionally. So we are branching up into the next segment of the conference where we have Dr. Emmanuel Mensah, a senior lecturer at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, joining us. He is a seasoned lecturer and researcher with a strong passion for geospatial science and remote sensing, particularly when it comes to UAV photogrammetry and its application to disaster management. Here he is sharing on applying geospatial technologies in identifying vulnerability to liquefied petroleum gas hazards in the Accra metropolis and implications for land use planning in Ghana. I hope I got that right, Dr. Mensah. Welcome. It's good to have you with us, and I look forward to hearing your presentation. Hello, Dr. Mensah. I see he is on now.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Thank you for joining us. It's good to see you.
Yes, it's good to see you as well. Okay.
Yes. Please feel free to share your screen.
Yeah, share my screen and then. Okay, I think it's in presentation mode now.
Yes, it's in presentation mode now. I can see your screen.
All right, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Dr. Emmanuel Mensah, and I'm a lecturer with the Department of Geography and Regional Planning of the University of Cape Coast. And my journey with GIS began many years ago with my undergraduate education and at the University of Cape Coast, incidentally. And I also did GIS at the master's level in an institution in the Netherlands. And then for the PhD, I also did applied GIS. So, and incidentally, that is what I teach at the University of Cape Coast. Today, I'd like to share some findings that I have on vulnerability to industrial hazards, specifically hazards having to do with liquefied petroleum gas and the implications that has on land use planning. I'm sure most of us are aware that disasters generally have a negative relationship with sustainable development. And the more disaster situations we have, the less likely it is that we will attain our development goals. And so if you look at the SDG goal 11 on building resilient cities, it specifically mentions that we need to manage disaster risk in order to be able to attain build sustainable cities or build resilient cities and then be able to achieve our development goals. There have been quite a number of disaster events that in the past that have created huge problems for a lot of cities. We can make mention of the Bhopal accident in India in 1984, the Mexico City incident, and quite recently there was one in Nigeria, in Lagos State, where there was some explosion involving liquefied petroleum gas that led to quite a lot of injuries and some fatalities. And the financial costs associated with these are also quite high, and so are the social impacts. And so that is something that we want to take a look at. Now, one of the reasons why the impacts of these incidents tend to be quite high is the fact that there are significant consequences, not just on the site where these industrial facilities are located, but then in the off-site areas also. And this also comes with the recognition that a lot of the land use practices in the surrounding areas tend to be a bit problematic. And so it tends to create some situation of exposure and vulnerability and risk. In Europe, an accident occurred somewhere in 1976 in Italy at a place called Seveso. And so following that, there was a declaration known as the Seveso II Declaration, that recognized that land use planning could play a critical role in helping to reduce vulnerability. And so the Service 02 declaration recognized that risk information should be taken into consideration when land use decisions are being taken. So the expectation is that when development permits are being given or the zoning is being done, it will consider the risk in the environment and then factor that into the decision making. And that can really help to reduce the vulnerability. The study area is the Accra metropolis, which is located in the Greater Accra region of Ghana. And it's the capital of Ghana, as you are aware. And you know that LPG has become a dominant source of fuel for use in most homes in the urban areas. And so the demand is quite high. And so there are a number of LPG stations that supply the fuel to users, and they are located within the city center. In the Accra metropolis, as at 2019, we had about 15 of them. And for this particular study, about 10 of them were selected. Those are the ones in the green. Now, in Accra also, we had witnessed since about 2007 till about 2022, we had some accidents occurring. Now, these accidents have had some significant impacts. It has led to some fatalities. We've had about 35 fatalities, and then a total of about 520 injuries. They've occurred in Accra, Kumasi, Takrady, and then even in some other regions. And that is really a real issue. Now, the hazards that we are talking about that have led to these disasters are basically what we call jet fires, which is when there's a stream of gas that escapes from a container or from containment and goes out into the environment at high speed. And then, of course, it attracts fire and it shoots out as a jet. And then we have another situation where we have what we call a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. And with that situation, the tank containing the liquefied petroleum gas gets heated up in an initial fire, and then the pressure inside it increases and then it explodes. And once it explodes, the liquid turns to gas instantaneously, most of it, and then it burns up because it is flammable. What does not burn up is left as a pool fire. It's left as a pool fire that burns on the ground. That burns on the ground, as you can witness. So after the levy occurs, there's a pool fire that is comprised of the remainder of the fuel that did not burn. So those are the two hazards that we are looking at. Now, the problem has to do with the fact that these stations are located in the urban environment, and their proximity to the residential areas and other land uses poses a health risk. And this has been recognized by Yerenchi et al. And other authors. There's also the arbitrary rezoning of some of these areas in order to locate the facility. Sometimes you get a residential area and part of it will be rezoned, and then the facility would be sited in there. Attempts have been made to address the problem by applying some land use regulations, like imposing a 500-meter buffer around the facility, within which no public facilities like churches or schools should be located. Yet what we find is that these facilities end up in close proximity to the stations. And the buffer distance that is also applied is applied generically. And then that poses a problem because we believe that the vulnerability levels and the risk levels at the various sites are different, they vary. And so we cannot really have one generic buffer distance that may protect all of the areas. There have been some attempts at assessing the risk, but these have been qualitative. They are focused mostly on the on-site risk and have not been spatial or have not been in the form of maps. And so it makes it difficult to, in a situation like this, make decisions on land use, whether to approve or not to approve land use developments in the vicinity of the station, because it is difficult to tell where the hazard gets to, the extent of the hazard, the extent of the vulnerability at different locations around the station, and the extent of the risk, and then whether to then take a decision to approve a particular development or not. And so even though following these accidents, some attempts have been made to improve on the management at the station, management of the facilities, and then also to apply better technologies at the station. The issue of land use, modifying the land use policies so that it utilizes risk information has been quite slow because that kind of information is just not available. So here you see that in Ghana, we have a 200-meter buffer that is supposed to be around the station, where within that buffer, there shouldn't be any hot works or any type of activity that uses naked fires. But as you can tell, these areas are quite highly developed, and there are a lot of places that utilize naked fires. And then also within the 500-meter buffer, we are expected not to have public places, but then as you can tell, these are also in existence. So the question is, what are the hazard levels around the station? What is the extent of the hazard? Is it up to the 500? Is it beyond the 500? How about vulnerability? What are the vulnerability levels around the station? And how can we utilize that information to make decisions on whether to approve land use developments or not? And then also there's the issue of stakeholders and what the stakeholders think regarding these issues, because they are also important, an important part of the issue, and you cannot solve the problem without consulting them. So this is what we sought out to do. So that's the framework that was used. It looks at the application of safe technology and safe management, basically on site, to ensure the safety of citizens. And then the land use planning and emergency response are also important components. And so this is what the Seveso sought to address. And it sought to look at the inclusion of risk assessment and inspections into these processes, and then to have consultation with the general public on these issues, and then to demonstrate the safety in a safety report. So to compute the vulnerability, basically we utilized some other software from the United States Environmental Protection Agency to model the consequences of the levee. Specifically, what was modeled was the thermal radiation or the heat that would be released during the event. Now, I must mention that apart from the heat, there are also missiles that may be released, but that was not modeled in this case. So we modeled the thermal radiation from the levee, and then that was brought into the ArcGIS Professional, the version 2.9. And then we also utilized the building footprints to assess the exposure duration. To assess the exposure duration, we looked at generally how much time it will take for an individual at a specific location within the hazard zone to run at a speed of 4 meters per second to shelter. So that distance was computed, and then we divided by the speed, got it, and then added the reaction time of 5 seconds. And so that is what equation 1 takes into consideration. It gives us the exposure duration. The equation 2 looks at what we call the thermal dose unit, which is basically a combination of the thermal radiation or the heat from the event, and then the multiplied by the time. And so when we multiply the time by the amount of the heat that is released, it gives us the thermal dose unit, which serves as an indicator of vulnerability because it combines the exposure with the consequences of the magnitude of the heat. And then equation 3, which is basically a probit function, was used to estimate the chance of fatality for those within the hazard zone. So it was used to further estimate. This is an equation that is basically like a regression that was built using data from experiments conducted some time ago, and it basically is able to predict the chance of fatality. That is the Y. And then the fourth equation adds the component of frequency, because the equation 2 and the equation 3, they talk about the consequences. But then the fourth equation adds on the likelihood or the probability of the consequences occurring. So that then gives us risk. But then I would not be going so much into that. I will be focusing on the vulnerability. Now, when the vulnerability is computed, we divide it into 3 zones based on the magnitude of the vulnerability. So we have an inner zone, a middle zone, and an outer zone. The outer zone has less than 1% chance of fatality. The middle zone has between 1 to about 50% chance of fatality, and then the inner zone has greater than 50% chance of fatality. And so, having computed that, we then divide the area based on the magnitude of the chance of fatality. Now, having divided the area into zones, the land use types within the hazard zone are then classified based on their sensitivity. And here we have 4 sensitivity classes, which are areas with normal working populations. Then we have active residential areas, and then we have vulnerable populations like hospitals and schools and so on. And then we have large outdoor populations like markets and stadiums and so on, being in the 4th category. So by combining information on whether a particular land use is located in the inner zone and also the land use sensitivity, we are able to make a decision as to whether to advise against or not advise against developments in that area. So for instance, if you look at the inner zone, land use types that contain normal working populations are not advised against, mostly because such facilities are protected, they are organized, and they can evacuate that easily, and mostly they are indoors. But then for vulnerable populations, like the number 3, that when it occurs in the inner zone will be advised against, because such populations are vulnerable and can easily succumb to the thermal radiation if they are exposed. This criteria was adopted from the UK Health and Safety Executive. So basically, this is the methodology that was used. I'll go back to it when with more details, but basically we collected weather data on the weather, population, the amount of fuel that is stored at each site, and the some information on the possible scenario, that is the possible type of leakage that could occur, or the possible type of fire incident that could occur, whether a levee or a jet fire. And then this was then modeled and then brought into the ArcGIS, like I mentioned. And then there was also a survey that was done to solicit information from those within the vicinity. So some of the key findings. Generally, we found that the thermal radiation ranged between 2 kilowatts per square meter and about 350 square kilowatts. That is around the station, at the core where the station was located. And as you move away from the station, the thermal radiation load decreases by a factor of 0.391 to about 0.532 for the different stations. So that was the least, and then the highest. The levee situation, or the levee event, as you saw, comes with a fireball. And so the dimension of the fireball, as it was modeled, the least was about 116 meters, and then the highest was about 161 meters. So that is the extent of the fireball. Obviously, the fireball, if you are located within that distance, then you are likely to suffer a fatal dose, especially if you are exposed for some time. Then within the 10 kilowatt zone, that went up to about 350 meters. And there also, it could be potentially lethal if you are exposed to about, to it for about 60 seconds. Then we have the 5 kilowatt zone where you could be exposed. If you are exposed to it, within 60 seconds, you could suffer second degree burns. And then there's a 2 kilowatt zone where you could suffer pain of some sort. Now, this distances obviously goes beyond the 500 meters that restriction that had been placed on public places. So it's quite interesting to note. But then this is the hazard. Now, the hazard levels also were correlated with the amount of fuel that is stored at the site. So those places that had more fuel obviously had a bigger hazard footprint. Now, this is the land use that was mapped within the area, and some of the tools that were mentioned in the earlier presentation were used to collect the land use information. And this was basically field work that was done. We did the partitions originally using the base map in ArcGIS, and then went to the field to actually record the land uses, and then that was done. So you can see that there are a lot of commercial areas a lot of residential areas in yellow, and some combined commercial residential areas and so on around the stations. The stations are the green triangles that you can observe. Now, most of the stations, as we rightly guessed, had a lot of land uses that were not conforming to industrial land use, because these stations are supposed to be located in industrial areas. So within the jet fire hazard zone, we found out that about 82% of it was not industrial. Only 17% of it was industrial. Within the fireball diameter, 77% of it was not industrial. And then within the lethal zone, that is the 10 kilowatt zone for the levy or for the explosion, 92% of it was not industrial. And this is quite interesting because similar things have been found in industrial areas all around the continent. Especially in Kenya, for instance, they found that the conformance with industrial standards or industrial land use decreases with time. And it was a similar thing that was found here. Now, with respect to the vulnerability, this is the map showing the vulnerability based on the thermal dose units. The first one I showed you had to do with the hazard. Now, hazard, there's a difference between hazards and vulnerability. Hazards may potentially cause harm, but do not necessarily cause harm. But when we talk about vulnerability, then we are really talking about the extent of harm that may occur when you are exposed to a given hazard. And that is why that takes into consideration the exposure duration. So having looked at that, realized that about 14,491, that is about 0.9% of the people within the metro were going to be vulnerable in case there was all these stations happened to explode. If they happen to have a full tank of fuel and they happen to explode, then we are expecting that about 0.9% of the population may be exposed. Then 29.6% of them will be exposed to pain. That is those in the yellow zone, in the zone marked yellow. They will be exposed to pain. 56% of them may be exposed to first degree burns. And that is talking about those, the yellow zone is there, those who are not going to experience any pain. The yellow zone is those below the pain threshold. Those in the pain threshold are in the brown area that follows immediately after the yellow zone. Then those with the first degree burns, there'll be about 56% of them, and they would be, just a second, let me get my pointer activated. Yes, those within the brown zone would experience first degree burns, and that would be about 56% of them. And then 7.9% will be exposed to second degree burns. For those who suffer third degree burns, that will be about 3.6%, and then 2.7% will be exposed to potentially fatal doses. That is those right at the center, at the core, near the stations. Now, in looking at the variations across the stations, we find out that some of the stations had higher numbers of higher numbers that would be exposed to potentially fatal doses. For instance, we have the station that is at Aveno, which is a place in Accra, having as many as 55 people being potentially exposed to fatal doses. And that has to do with their high population densities around these areas and the fact that they are also exposed to significant amounts of thermal radiation based on the quantities of fuel stored. We looked at it specifically also for children, and for some of the areas we had 0, like Choco, that is in the coastal area in the Accra metropolis, and that was because of the quantity of fuel stored there. It was not that as significant as the others, and also there were a number of places where people could take shelter, and so that did reduce the levels a bit. But then you realize that the other figures in terms of the first degree burns also quite high. Now, the implications of the vulnerability levels for land use planning. Having determined that these levels exist, the next question then was, what does it mean, or what does it hold then in terms of land use planning? And one of the things that we observed was that while the hazard goes up to 770 kilometers, the vulnerability, specifically when it comes to the chance of fatality, extends only to about 300 meters. And within that zone, in order to be able to reduce the vulnerability levels, we have to change about 90% of the land uses in that zone, that is within the inner zone. For the middle zone, that was also about, for the middle zone, that was about 15% of the land uses that needed to be altered. And then for the outer zone, there was no change. Now, as I mentioned, the criteria was borrowed from the UK Health and Safety Executive, but then we made some modifications to the criteria. And with the modifications, then it still required that about 62% of the land uses in the inner zone should be still changed. Now, I'm sure you are aware that these are already developed areas. And so it's quite interesting then to begin to think about these issues if really we are to change 90% or even 62% of the land uses within these vulnerability zones in order to reduce the level of vulnerability. For the jet fires, we had similar results where also about 90% of the land uses in the inner zone had to be changed, and only 24% of those in the middle zone needed only no change in the, and only 15% of change in the middle zone. With the modified criteria, only about 24% of the land use in the inner zone had to be changed. So we did also talk to the people in the area, and generally we found out that about, for those with, most of them were low-income earners, and they were mostly traders for the females, and the males were engaged in artisanal work. They were carpenters, welders, and mechanics, and so on. And their income levels were quite low. And we found out that in terms of their perception of the risk of living around this station and working around the station, those who earned lower incomes were less likely to perceive a risk to their socioeconomic risk or risk to their finances or to their economic situation, because most of them were low-income earners, and so they did not think that the LPG could pose serious risk to their economic, to them in an economic sense. But with respect to health and security, they did think that the LPG could pose a lot of risk to their health. But then, because they were basically looking out for their economic well-being, they ignored the health implications and focused on still being in the area to basically ply their trade. In fact, it's only those who were high-income earners, it's those who were high-income earners who were 4 times more likely to perceive high risk associated with this. And most of them, it is because they basically had some vested interest in the area, economic interest in the area, and so they did perceive some high risk to their economic or their financial portfolios in the area. In terms of strategies, how to address this, when we queried the people living around the area, generally they expressed that they could not really do much personally to address the situation, and they felt that it had to be the responsibility of the owners of the stations and governments to intervene. With respect to what government could do to intervene with the situation, when they were queried on land use planning as one of the tools, or land use change as one of the tools that could be employed to address the situation, they were not really in favor of that. And they gave various reasons for it. And mostly the reasons had to do with the economic incentives associated with the activity, with the LPG facility, and the economic incentives that it brings, because people are able to ply their trade around it. Those who are also involved in the trade have invested in it, and so they really saw no reason why they should engage in land use change as the first means of addressing the situation. Their preference was for the application of safe technologies and safe management as ways of addressing it, and then some land use change could be brought in, but then they were not really in favor of it. And so it is not surprising that the cylinder recirculation policy, which has been proposed by government, was also they were also not in favor of that, because for them that also connoted land use change. And then for those who had invested in their business, they also felt that it was going to deprive them of their investments. And so there wasn't much preference for that. The suggestion to also use alternative fuels was not welcome. That welcome to them. They really preferred the LPG, but felt that safer management, safer technology could be utilized to address this. So in conclusion, we did find out that the LPG hazards exist, and it goes far beyond the 200 and the 500 meter restrictions that have been placed, and that the hazard varies based on the quantity of fuel at the various locations, and also on the type of hazard. And we also did conclude that the vulnerability is quite high, looking at the number that we found of about 14,491 people, and it far exceeds local and international land use planning guidelines. And in terms of the implications of the vulnerability for land use planning, generally we would have to change about 90% of the areas close to the station, up to about 300 meters. We'll have to change 90% of the land use there in order to reduce the chance of fatality. But to address the other types of vulnerability, the first degree burns and second degree burns, then it means we even have to extend the land use modifications even further. And then generally, we realize also that the stakeholders, they hold a utilitarian view of risk based on socioeconomic influences, and that they have a strong preference for safe technology and safe management rather than land use change. So in terms of recommendations, the recommendation is that there should be a cap on the quantity of fuel stored at LPG facilities, and the information should be documented and made publicly available to help check these things, and also to help reduce the hazard footprint, because the hazard footprint was quite large. Then also, existing LPG stations must be relocated to LPG storage farms or tank farms in wholly industrial areas. And these wholly industrial areas, of course, they should be outside the city, and they should have adequate buffer distances that should be determined through consequence or risk-based assessments. And the area around it should be managed through risk-informed land use planning. So in essence, we are saying that the use of a generic buffer distance should be discontinued, and risk information should be incorporated into the determination of the buffer distance and the management of the area in terms of approval and disapproval of land use development in the vicinity. There should also be strong enforcement of land use restrictions around the LPG facilities in order to curtail the problem that has arisen in the Accra Metro, where almost 90% of the land use has to be changed. In the new locations where these facilities will be sent, there has to be strong enforcement. And in line with the cylinder recirculation model, where they intend to turn the current locations into distribution centers, they would still have to manage the land uses around these facilities, because they still would have some LPG there, which could potentially be hazardous. And so some enforcement still needs to take place. And then finally, the socioeconomic dimensions must be considered when we are addressing land use planning around LPG facilities, because it strongly influences people's risk perceptions and their willingness to subscribe to land use modifications once the problem emerges. And so that is where we would end, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you also, Dr. Mensah. It's been a pleasure having you and going into in-depth detail about this project. We are grateful to have you with us and for you to share your knowledge with us. At this point, we would like to remind others that the platform is still available for you to share your questions, but this time we are going straight into the Q&A section. So if you haven't already, you can type your questions in the Q&A box, or after we are done with the already existing questions, then you can raise your hand up for us to call on you to ask your questions. So let me start with those already here. Some have already been answered, so if you can kindly go to the answered section. But I'm starting with Emmanuel Yabua asking Dr. Esther Ibrahim, what validation or accuracy assessment approach did you use to validate your results? Sorry, Esther, if you could kindly respond.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Yes. So I actually put a response to him, but let me also explain in case others have not really read the question or the response. So actually, I don't know which of the projects he's asking for, but when I looked at his other questions, I just did the last one, the machine learning project, was the crop type mapping. So we actually produced 3 maps before we arrived to the crop type mapping. So in the first level, we created a map for land cover just to extract what is non-cropland and cropland in the end. So in the first level for the land cover, we use cross validation using area adjusted. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's by Olof, I think Olof in 2015. So the area adjustment means that for each of the classes, you have the area and collect training and validation samples based on the dominance of the class. So you now run a validation based on that. So in the second level of the binary class, cropland and non-cropland, we use the same approach. Use area adjustment for cross validation. So where did you map? Is it correct with your validation? Then in the crop type mapping, because we did not have enough samples, when you're dealing with machine learning, you need a lot of training so that the learner can understand the characteristics of the future you're trying to predict. So we had over these 2 years about almost 3,000 samples. We felt it was not enough to keep aside. So usually you put like 70% of your field data for training and 30% for validation. But we didn't do that because we felt it was not enough. So we ran the classification with all the points, but there's what is called, I don't know if you're familiar with K-fold cross validation. So this K-fold means that you split your reference into multiple folds. So in our case, we split it into 20. So in each case, you are using different versions of the 20 that you're set aside to validate successively. He doesn't know that he can actually read about that, which was what we used for the final map, which was the crop type.
Okay, thank you, Esther. Emmanuel, I hope that answers your question. It seems Dr. Mensah is also responding to quite a few, so let me move on to Sunday. Sunday is asking how she can get access to the materials used for today's presentation. So I'm sorry, I mentioned earlier that the webinar is being recorded, the conference is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel. The link also to the video will be shared as well. So stay tuned, it will be shared on our social media platforms, and if possible, we can get it to you by email. So if you can stick to the end, we'll give you our details so that you can follow up on that, or check our social media channels for the link.
Sorry, let me correct that. I'm not a doctor yet. So you cannot address me as that yet.
Okay, thank you, duly noted. So let's say this is a prophetic declaration. Very soon we'll start referring to you as Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you so much, Esther. Ebenezer is asking also if the recording will be made available and shared. Yes, it will be. So please stay tuned and that will be done. So let's see. Ebenezer is asking, how can geospatial analysis assist in determining the optimal placement of LPG storage facilities, transportation routes, and pipelines to ensure efficient and reliable supply? And this is directed to Dr. Mensah. So Dr. Mensah, if you could kindly address this question.
Yes, I think he's asking how can it be used to optimally locate LPG facilities and pipelines? Was that the question?
It appears so. It's asking, lastly, how can geospatial analysis assist in determining the optimal placement of LPG storage facilities, transportation routes, and pipelines to ensure efficient and reliable supply? So it's looking at how we can use these tools that we've mentioned.
How that can be done.
Yes, please.
Okay, so one of the most important things to do in terms of finding the optimal location would be to first of all do what we refer to as a consequence analysis. That is, you model the effect of the effect that the chemical would have on the environment if it should get out of containment, because wherever it is going to be located, it would be contained. And so if it does get out of containment, the question is, where is it going to go? And that is where GIS can play a role in helping to generate spatial information on the consequences or the spread, the spatial extent and the magnitudes of these chemicals, whether they are toxic chemicals or they are flammable chemicals. The GIS can be used to model it. There are special tools that are not in the ArcGIS Pro, but then these special tools are able to help you to model the consequences or the effects of these, the loss of containment of these chemicals. Then you can bring the results into ArcGIS, and then when you have the hazard in ArcGIS can then help you to compute the vulnerability, which is the next level, because having the hazard there alone does not say very much. The hazard footprint might be large, but then it may not necessarily, not everybody may be vulnerable to it. And so within the GIS, we can then utilize the tools like I did in the GIS. Specifically, I used the Jupyter notebooks, the Jupyter notebook in ArcGIS and the ArcPy software library, which contains the functions in ArcGIS. And then I used it to compute the vulnerability levels. So you can go through the literature, get the computations, the formulas for computing the vulnerability, whether it's the level of toxicity and so on. You can use the Python tools and the Jupyter notebooks in ArcGIS to script it, to generate a script which would utilize these formulas to compute the vulnerability. And there are very powerful functions for manipulating the attribute table and for manipulating spatial data when you use the scripting language. Now, someone would say that I don't have programming experience, so how do I go about it? Today, we live in the age of artificial intelligence, and so you can easily generate Python code or code in any other language once you are able to specify exactly what it is that you want. the code to be used for. And so it is possible to, for instance, use ChatGPT to generate some code, bring it into ArcGIS, modify it, and then use it to compute the vulnerability and then the risk. And then other factors like the access to transportation and so on can then be looked at. And then finally, once you know the vulnerability, you would have to combine the vulnerability with the probability of the hazard, because the fact that you are vulnerable does not mean that you will be at risk. Being vulnerable only specifies the extent to which you may sustain damage, but it does not tell the probability of you sustaining that damage. So for instance, the 14,491 people I mentioned may be vulnerable. They may be vulnerable, but I have not specified how likely it is that they may be vulnerable. That is another level of the analysis. And that can also be computed using the GIS tool. So that is it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mensah. For the sake of time, unfortunately, we can't respond to all the written questions. So these will be addressed in the question and answer section of the Zoom chat. But then we are opening the floor for anyone with other questions. Kindly raise your hand and you will be unmuted so you can ask. So we've opened the floor for questions. Feel free to raise your hand. If it's a general question, kindly let us know. And if you are addressing one particular speaker also, kindly inform us. Okay, I see 2 hands up. Please, do we have any other questions? So let's start with Joseph. Joseph Ame, yes. Hello, Joseph.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I believe you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. It was quite a very wonderful presentation. I really learned a lot today, but I have some gray areas that I need more clarification on. So particularly the area of the statistical analysis. I see you mentioned, Esther mentioned some things about regression, correlation, and cross-tabulation with regards to making predictions and actually answering research questions. So I really want to get more detail on that, because from the presentation, she was just giving more like a general overview on how those things are applied, those analysis are applied to prediction. So I will really need to get more details on that. Then I've been hearing of factor maps, suitability map. What are factor maps? What are suitability maps? Also, she mentioned mathematical models for vulnerability computation. I'm actually asking this because I'm a mathematician by profession, and I do mathematical modeling. So I really like to know how it practically applies in this regard. I saw some equations and some mathematical models there. So how does it really play out in practice with GIS? So those are the areas where I sought some clarifications. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. Esther, please, did you get that?
Yes, I got the question. I think the first one he was asking how, okay, see results, maps that we cannot explain using physical phenomena, maybe increase in population, or we feel that there's more to be done from the statistical aspect, which I'll use this one as an example. How do you go about it? This is actually very straightforward in GIS or in sense. So what you do is that you have this, for example, if you have, there's what is called raster to raster statistics. So you use a raster map of the weather component, for example, and a raster map of the land cover. So for each of the years, you're running a regression to see, or whatever statistical method you're using. So there are tools for that. I think there's something called generalized weighted regression in ArcGIS. So what you're doing is that you're running it side by side to see in these rasters where you see changes over the years. Is there a correlation, and which of these factors correlate? Like in terms of this one, we actually just use R to deduct the statistical revenue. So what you do is you have a map, and you also have your weather data, for example. And in this instance, we made a recommendation for extensive, more further studies, because as you see, these dots in red are the years where we have done the mapping: 1990, 1999, and 2000, 2010, and 2015. So if you're running this regression, you're using only 4 timestamps, which is what we saw here. So if you are concluding based on this 4 times span, it might not really be very fair, because whatever you see, you're comparing only 4 times spans as against 26. So how to do it? Using R, you can actually extract from values. There's a tool called extract values. Extract values to point in ArcGIS. Wherever you have a point, for example, on the map, you have a point for the climate, maybe the weather data is here or here. What you need to do is just to extract the value from the raster map, and that you can use to compare whatever value you have extracted and run side by side, just using values like you do for any of your statistical analysis. Then what we felt, like I said, we felt it was not really very fair to do that. That's why we use MODIS NDVI, which is not now the land cover, but using vegetation index. So, and this side by side across 26 years, and this is the variation that you statistically we're trying to see what is the relationship between these 3 variables: NDVI, temperature, and rainfall, which you plot. So ordinarily, it's, if you can Google on or also read the paper, it will explain better how it was done. You can scan it and read it. Or also check online for how to do it. Sorry, I was just running through findings because I was feeling what can I present or how to do it might not really very whatever in 30 minutes. So maybe you can just Google it, or you can reach out to me if you have specific questions or tools, need resources that you use in doing that. I'll be happy to share. Now, your second question, sorry, I did not write it. Sorry, I did not write it. I didn't have a pen close by. But can you please say what you asked? Remind me what you asked about the second and third question.
Okay. So for the sake of time, Joseph, do you mind typing your questions out in the chat box so that Esther can respond for you? And I would also like to.
Sorry, I remember.
Yeah.
Sorry, I remember the last one, which he was talking about mathematical equations and how it can be used for modeling or so. So like I said, I gave an example of this, and what you have are raster maps. What you have is raster maps. So in the raster maps, you just use this formula and impute them in ArcGIS. So you have a space where it allows you to enter the formula. And then instead of these variables are maps, they are factor maps, which brings me to your second question. Now I remember you're asking about factor maps. So what you need to do is to use these equations one by one, replace it like R here is your rainfall, right? So you're going to use your R to get the erosivity and then erosivity, sorry. Then you're going to get the erodibility as well. So what you need to do in all the equations is replace them with the maps. Where you have numbers, you leave them, but where you have a map for all of this, for example, you're going to replace them with a map. In this instance, you're using a soil map. Then every other things in the equation is number. So it will automatically calculate for you. All you need to do is to put the calculation in your raster calculator. That's it. I think that answers the question. Then the last question you were asking about what is factor maps and how do you use them in mapping or something. So factor maps are different variables. For example, this clearly shows what a factor map is. So you have different variables that explain what you're trying to model. For example, here we have rainfall, slope, elevation, temperature, flow accumulation, proximity to settlement, proximity to water bodies, proximity to roads, land cover, geology, and soil as a factor of predicting where it's suitable to dam water for irrigation. So this is what you're going to play with, what you're going to impute in your equation to tell you, okay, select for me what is or where is most suitable to create a dam, for example. So after you have all these factor maps, you standardize them into a GIS, whatever, that it reads and understand, okay, this one means highly suitable, and 10 means, 1 means not suitable, and then 10 means highly suitable. So you are now putting them into a standard that it will calculate all of these 11 factors and show you areas where it's very, so this suitability map is a combination of all of these factors mathematically predicting for you what is most suitable for the purpose of it. So you can replicate for every kind of modeling that you are doing or whatever interests your research.
Okay, Joseph, I hope that answers the questions you had. Thank you so much, Esther. I see one more hand up, but I would like to pose the suggestion to our speakers that since time is beating us, could we also allow for more questions at the end of the conference? So the Zoom link would still be up and live, and anybody with further questions could type them in the Q&A box. Would that work for you?
Yes, I think that would be fine. But I'd want to give a little bit of information if that's okay.
Please feel free.
Yes. So in relation to using GIS for quantitative analysis, there's a good book that I can recommend, and this is a book by Andy Mitchell, and it's published by the Esri Press. You would want to get the volume 2, which is, there are 3 volumes, but the volume 2 and the volume 3 would be good for you. It's on spatial measurements and statistics. And this book would be really good for those who want to do quantitative analysis in ArcGIS Pro. And then there's another book which is Scripting with Python by Paul Zandbergen. Scripting with Python in ArcGIS Pro. Scripting with Python in ArcGIS Pro by Paul Zandbergen. And that is also a very good book that I would recommend for those who want to do quantitative analysis in ArcGIS Pro. And then you would also want to take basic lessons in Python programming, you can always go online and learn from W3 schools, and from so many other sources, the basics of Python programming, and that will be very useful for you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mensah. That is quite helpful. Please note that we are about to end the conference, but for the speakers and I, we are still leaving. We are still staying so that you can address your further comments and inquiries to us. Mustafa and Ruben, I saw your hands up. Please, I have not forgotten about you. Please be patient with us so that at the end of this, we can address you directly. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the 2023 Sambus Geo-User webinar. I cannot overstate how important and how much it means to us that you've kept with us all through this time, and how grateful we are that you took the time to be with us here today. Geospatial technology and geospatial analysis is quite broad, and it can be found and applied in every single aspect of our lives. I think Esther was even talking about it in the use of fashion. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So time will not allow us to exhaust every single possibility there is. What Sambus wants you to know is that we still have these educational sessions. In fact, we have a webinar coming up later this year. So keep yourselves posted on our social media platforms, and we'll let you know when the time is near. A link to a feedback survey has been shared in the chat box. Kindly fill in the survey to help us improve. We're always aiming at excellence and how best to serve you. So kindly do that, and we'll be grateful. Once again, the recording will be shared and made available, so also keep yourselves posted. Feel free to get in touch with us at Sambus Geospatial. We are dedicated to providing innovative geospatial solutions for all and various sectors. In fact, we offer a wide range of products and services, and we'll be delighted to discuss how we can help you leverage the power of location intelligence to achieve your goals. We are closing with this quote by Jack Danjamon, that the application of GIS is limited only by the imagination of those who use it. There might be a finite number of tools, but when you apply your imagination to how to use those tools in your work projects, your workflows, and even in your hobbies, you have unlimited potential. So I'd like to once again say a very big thank you to our participants and also to our speakers who have taken the time to be with us, to share their knowledge, to share their stories, to inspire us. Valentine, Esther, Dr. Mensah, thank you. We are very, very grateful. And I'm sure some of our participants would like to connect with you after here. Would it be possible for you to share your details, or would you like to do that after here? Hello, Esther, Valentine, and Dr. Mensah.
Yeah, I think I'll just put it in the chat.
In the chat, okay. Okay, thank you. Dr. Mensah, please, you were...
Yes, I'd also put my email in the chat so they can...
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it yourself. Their details will be available, so you can share your questions. Some of you I know are also working on projects that are related to what was discussed. Take advantage of this opportunity. Search for Sambus Geospatial also on social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram to get more news about updates to geospatial technology, especially from our OEMs, Wintra, NV5 Geospatial, Esri, and Tremble. We look forward to seeing you again in our future webinars. Thank you and have a great day. Our details are on the screen. Feel free to link up with us. Thank you. If you have other engagements, feel free to log off, but for those of us with further questions, the speakers and I will be still available for you to pose them. Thank you and have a great day. So let's see the